Hello and welcome to Miniature Adventures. I'm Big Lee, and today I wanted to talk about role-playing games as a route into wargaming. So today's discussion point really comes from me thinking about my origins as a gamer. There's a reason for that, but I've been having a good think about where I came from and how I got started in the wider hobby. And for me, that route was through a group of friends at school, finding this new and unusual game called role-playing, D&D, and we started off with role-playing games and moved on eventually after many years to some fantasy wargaming. Got bigger, we did other games. There was the inevitable break that most people tend to have at some point in their gaming career, and then when I came back into the hobby, I eventually got into historical war games, and that story gets replicated quite a lot. I've been hearing more and more of it when you listen to podcasts and conversations with other people, and it contrasts slightly with my traditional impression of what most wargamers were, because every time you read a book or read an article in a magazine, or you would get the impression that every learned wargamer came into the hobby because they discovered a copy of Featherstone or Grant in their local library, and they were immediately a Napoleonics wargamer and were building armies and casting figures themselves, and that's true for a lot of people, and there's nothing wrong with that, of course. But for me, my route to wargaming came through my origins as a role-playing gamer. Something I still do today. I still play D&D even today, and indeed with some of my friends from way back at school. And the more I think about it, the more I realise that actually I think that role-playing games are a good route into the early stages of wargaming. So again, the point I'm trying to make today is that I've been having a conversation. Last week's video was all about how do we get, what are the barriers to entry to our hobby to young people, and often the things that come up are things like painting and having to do lots of figures, or the historical research or whatever it might be. But one of the things that I've come to realise from the conversation I've had with gamers through my channel and so on, and conversations with the kids, is that we're not the same gamer at any one point in our lives. The gamer I am now is not the same as I was when I was back at school. I had different interests, access to different types of materials, and a different, not necessarily a different group of friends, but a different perspective on my hobby. And obviously I had less time and less money and so on, and then later on when I did have time and money, I was too busy trying to build a career, and eventually, after many years, I have got to the point where I am now, where I consider myself to be firmly a historical wargamer who also role plays, and understanding that we are not fixed in aspects, so to speak. We do change. I realise that I think that role-playing games are an excellent route into wargaming. So we all talk about the younger generation all being the Games Workshop generation, and then they move on from there, and some will end up becoming historical wargamers because they get exposed to historical wargames when they go to shows and so on. And that's absolutely true. But I also think, having looked at it from the other direction, that actually role-playing games are also a great route for some people to get into wargaming, because you start off painting one or two figures, nothing too onerous. You learn your skill, you cut your teeth on those few figures that you paint for a particular game. And then you get a bit more ambitious. My group did. We did slightly bigger games, more figures. We wanted to recreate larger skirmishes. And before we knew it, we were using role-playing rules to play skirmish wargaming. In fact, in one particular game that I remember, I ran a game set outside the walls of a fantasy city, and the heroes, my players, were trying to direct the defence of this city against a great big army outside. And when I say great big army, it was basically a large skirmish game with probably 60 or 70 figures on the games table. And we were using role-playing rules to be able to play this game. And obviously there was bits that I streamlined for the action that was away from the main group of players. But we were effectively playing a skirmish war game. Now for me, that meant painting lots of figures and really getting into what I would later on end up being a war game. And that, I think the same could happen to other role players. People who are getting into role playing now will maybe paint a few figures for their games table. When you go to role-playing conventions like Dragon Meet, for instance, there's manufacturers there selling wargaming figures, but there's plenty of manufacturers selling figures specifically for role-playing, and they're buying the same sort of paints and brushes as us, and they're painting their figures to similar qualities, maybe only a handful of figures because it's all they need for a role-playing game, but one thing leads to another, as you know, in this hobby, and once you get into it, you end up buying more and you get expanded and you get exposed to other rule systems, and before you know it, you're not just a role player, you're actually playing skirmish games, and then you're only one more step away from taking that obsession a little bit further and ending up being a wargamer. Now, that ain't going to work for everyone, that isn't the route for lots of people, but I do think it's a route that we shouldn't be snobbish about and overlook. If our kids, for instance, and both my girls have wargamed with me on the table, I've made them play a game with me, on more than one occasion, and particularly my youngest daughter is a rather canny general, so I don't like playing against her because she nearly always wins, but she's not really interested in playing war games. At the moment, both of my girls are interested in role-playing games, however, and both have painted figures and will happily push those little metal men around the table in a dungeon setting or whatever the game is, and it's only one small step from there to a skirmish game. If I was to put a game of Frostgrave on the table, they would all play that, because it's not that far from the D&D games that we play. And then from there, it's only another little step on, like I say, to historical war games or other fantasy-based games, and then maybe onto historical war games afterwards. So the point of this video really is just to say we should all be mindful of the fact that we don't want to get snobbish about our origins for being a historical war game. It doesn't matter whether you've come down the traditional route, none of us are born fully fledged wargamers. We all have an origin story, and sometimes that will be finding a copy of a Grant or Featherstone or something more up to date maybe, and immediately being absorbed by historical wargaming, Napoleonics, whatever it might be, or American Civil War and so on, and then or maybe you've come across one of these big box sets now where all the figures are in there and you've been inspired, and that has really got you into the hobby. Or maybe you found your route into historical wargaming by another route, by other sorts of games, by role-playing games. As I said earlier, I don't think we should be snobbish about those routes into our hobby, because all of them end up making happy gamers. And you can be more than one type of gamer at any one time, and none of us are ever the same throughout our gaming career. I'm definitely not the same gamer that first encountered the red box D&D set back in the late 80s probably. I'm a completely different person now. I still play that game, but I play a lot of other things as well now. So there you go, just my thoughts on an alternative route for gamers into the hobby, not just the traditional, the Games Workshop sci-fi fantasy wargaming route. There are other ways into our wonderful hobby, and we should encourage all of it, because as long as there's people coming into the hobby, they'll find the things that excite them, and some of those people will be finding historical war games. So as usual, I'd love to hear what you think. What's your origin story, if you like? How did you get into gaming? How did you end up becoming a historical war gamer? So as always, leave your comments below or over on my blog, Big Lee's Miniature Adventures. So if you enjoyed today's video, please like, subscribe and share, and of course hit the bell notification icon so you can get updates whenever I publish a new video. So until next week, look after yourself, get in as much gaming as you can, wargaming and role-playing if necessary, and of course keep rolling high.